Yeah, I know. Okay. So I'll repeat that. This is a security session, so please turn off your phones, close the door, and nothing leaves this room, right? Okay. Well, hello, good morning. I hope you enjoyed the conference so far. If not, you know to tell about it. My name is Ido Flato, and this session is about security in ASP.NET, both services and applications. Now, I guess you came to this session because of the topic and not because of me, because I don't know how many people are familiar with my work. As I said, my name is Ido. I come to you from Israel. That's why I have this funny accent. It's not a sexy accent like an Italian accent, but I hope we'll manage. I'm a consultant, an architect. I do a lot of stuff in the .NET world, especially in server and the web and, of course, the cloud in the past couple of years. Also did some book authoring, some course authoring for Microsoft. I actually have a book signing later on. If you want to come and I sign your book, it will be worth more on eBay probably. And this session, as I mentioned, is about security in ASP.NET. So first of all, just with a show of hands, how many people here are actually securing the applications? Okay, that's good. Those who aren't securing the application, don't raise your hands, because I'll take your email address and your site URL and just try to break to that site. So how many people are familiar with the ASP.NET membership provider? Okay, so the next slide won't surprise you that much. So first of all, just want to recap the last, say, 10 years of ASP.NET in the manner of security in ASP.NET. So back in .NET 1.1, anyone using .NET 1.1? Yeah? My condolences. We didn't have any special security built into ASP.NET. The first time we actually saw security in ASP.NET was in the beginning of .NET 2, where we had the membership provider, which was basically a SQL server that stored all the names of our users and their passwords. And from there on, Microsoft just got to improve that system over and over again. We got a new version, the simple membership provider, that web security stuff that we got back in .NET 4. Anyone used the web security stuff in .NET 4 that replaced the membership? That was a cool thing because it actually added OAuth and external provider to the ecosystem of our identities. Then we got the ASP.NET Universal providers for .NET 4 and .NET 4.5. We actually were able to migrate our local SQL server to other databases because we also got stuff like Entity Framework in the ASP.NET membership. So we were able to move our applications to Azure and actually use SQL databases to store our users. So that was great. But the new thing that we actually have now in ASP.NET in version 4.5 is the new ASP.NET identity system. And that's one of the things I'm going to talk about in today's session. Okay? So with a show of hands, how many people are actually managing users on their own in the system in a database, what is called the membership or the new identity system? Show of hands, how many people? Okay. That means there are plenty of people from the enterprise here, right? How many of you are using Active Directory to manage your users? Yeah, okay. Anyone using ADFS? Cool. Anyone using Azure? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Stick around. I'm going to get to Azure at some point. Okay. How many of you are not securing your applications? I told you don't raise your hands. Okay. So we have a lot of options to secure our systems with ASP.NET. We can use internal management of users and passwords. We can use Active Directory. We can use ADFS. We can use Azure Active Directory, whether we are uploading our applications to Azure or whether we're still using them on premises. So before we dive into all of these technologies and how they are implemented in ASP.NET and how we can use them to secure application, let's talk a bit about terminology. So first of all, identity versus credentials. Identity means myself, okay? I'm a person. I have a couple of identities. I'm an architect in my company. I'm a consultant in another company. I train at Microsoft. I have a bunch of identities. For each of those identities, I have a set of credentials, a username and a password. For Microsoft, I have a smart card that I use in order to identify myself. each of my identities has a set of credentials. Okay? You might be familiar with passwords, certificates, but there are all sorts of credentials, and we'll talk about some of them later on in the session. When we are securing our application, we are doing both authentication and authorization. Authentication basically means I need to know who you are. Okay? I just need to know who you are, so I will know that you're not an anonymous user. Authorization means basically to know which group you belong to, which role you play in the system, just so I know if you can actually do the stuff that you're asking to do, or if you are not permitted to do those stuff, I'll just show you a big error or just call the security guys to track you down and arrest you. The next part of security is roles and claims. How many people here are using role-based authorization? Okay. Anyone switch to claim-based authorization? Bunch of you? Yeah. Role-based authorization basically means that every user has a set of roles. They can be an administrator, they can be a secretary, they can be a report producer. They have a set of roles, and according to these roles, we decide what they can do in the system. Claims is basically saying everything there is to know about the user. Claims can have stuff like the user's name and the user's email, the user's pen size, the user's department, and where they work. Claims can also say permissions. So claims can be roles, claims can be ACLs, access control list, actually a set of permissions per entity. Claims can be anything that you want to describe the user and their interaction with the system. The ASP.NET Identity System is now using claims to describe users instead of just usernames, password, and roles as it did before. We'll see that later on. Next, two-factor authentication. How many of you are actually implementing two-factor authentication in their systems? How many of you are using two-factor authentication every time you want to log in into your Microsoft accounts or to your bank accounts, right? Okay, so we're actually using two-factor authentication more than we are actually implementing it. So hopefully you will also implement it and not just use it outside of your company. And the last thing I want to talk about, passive versus active protocols. How many people are familiar with MVC? MVC. How many people are familiar with Web API? Okay, so all of you are familiar with both UI and services. There's a whole lot of difference how we authenticate against a UI application where we have redirects to some sort of an identity provider to enter our username and password, and how we authenticate against a service that if we try to call it anonymously, we will just get a 401 unauthorized and go figure out what you're supposed to do now. Okay, so there's a big difference between passive protocols with UI and active protocols in services, and today we'll actually see how to implement these protocols in our ASP.NET applications for both MVC and Web API and Signal even. So before we start, I have to talk to you about one thing that is in the infrastructure of ASP.NET and is important to understand in order to use the security stuff of ASP.NET. How many people are familiar with Owin? How many people know the difference between Owin and Katana? Okay, so just to clarify what is Owin and what is Katana, Owin, Open Web Infrastructure for .NET, is basically just, think of it as a replacement for all those HTTP modules you created for IIS. It's basically a pipeline between your hosting environment and your application. The intention of it is to disconnect your application from IIS, from System Web, from all of the stuff you can only get in web hosting using IIS. Because as you saw in the sessions earlier this week, there is ASP.NET vNext. The dream is to go to a place where you can host your web application, your ASP.NET application, anywhere you want, whether it's on Windows using IIS, whether it's on the cloud, whether it's on a Mac using Mono. Okay? So to do that, we have to disconnect ASP.NET from IIS. And to do that, a bunch of people came out and announced Owin, a way to actually create a pipeline between your host and your web application. You want to do compression, you want to do security, you want to do logging, you want to do diagnostics. You don't implement that as HTTP modules anymore. You implement that as Owin middleware. Okay, so Owin is the standard. Katana is basically just the Microsoft implementation of Owin. So we'll have a bunch of resources at the end of the slides. You'll be able to go to the Katana Codeplex website, and you'll be able to see the list of all the implementations that Microsoft did for Owin, and that's basically named Katana. Okay? The namespace is still Microsoft.Owin, but the project itself is called Katana. Maybe that's where Project K came from. I don't know. Okay, so let's start to talk about security. So first of all, let's talk about those individual users' account that ASP.NET Identity System once called membership provider. Just remind me, how many people are using the membership provider? Okay, great. I see less hands than before. So do you decide not to use it suddenly? Okay. Okay, so first of all, the concept of ASP.NET Identity hasn't changed that much from the membership provider we had initially in .NET 2.0. The concept of ASP.NET Identity is now that we can actually use it to authenticate and to authorize our users no matter which framework we are using, whether we're using Web Forms, MVC, Web API, SignalR, all those stuff that have ASP.NET at the beginning of the phrase, they can actually use the same security mechanisms we have in ASP.NET. Okay, I will show you my code. I have an authorized header on top of my Web API, on top of my WCF, and in every demo, I will switch the implementation underneath, and I will not change the code of the Web API. It will just work no matter which authentication mechanism I'm using. Okay? The concept here is that we can use ASP.NET from every type of client. So whether I'm using a .NET application to call into my Web API services, I will be able to use active authentication against my ASP.NET Identity System, get an OAuth token, and then just send it to my service. Okay? It will just authenticate me, verify that I'm authenticated user, and will allow me entry to the system. I can use the identity system for both internal users that register and create a user using a username and a password, and for external providers that use stuff such as Facebook or Google accounts or Microsoft Live IDs. So I can do all of those stuff, by the way, in the simple membership that you had before. Okay. By the way, if you want to migrate to the simple provider, you can, from the simple provider, to the ASP.NET Identity, you can also do that. But the main thing to remember here is that ASP.NET Identity was rewritten to use Owin middlewares. So that's why I wanted to spend a couple of minutes just to tell you what Owin is. Okay? The entire framework of authentication is now based on Owin, and since this is Owin and since this is ASP.NET, this means everything is open source. You can actually see the code for everything, check for bugs, report bugs, fix bugs for the community if you want, if you have a bit of spare time. And let's just go ahead and see what are the new stuff in identity. So first of all, we are using, and I will show the identity version 2.0. How many people are using Visual Studio 2013 with update 1? Okay, how many switched to update 2? Okay, so just a heads up, update 1 uses the ASP.NET Identity System version 1.0. You can create projects with that and just open the NuGet window and update it to 2.0. Or you can just update your Visual Studio to update 2, which was released this week. And once you create a new web application, it will be created using the 2.0 version. Okay? So what's in 2.0? First of all, we talked about two-factor authentication. This is actually implemented into the ASP.NET system. We'll see that in a couple of minutes. We also have feature for account confirmation, so you will get an email before you can actually access your account, and you will have to activate your email. You can provide custom implementation for password validation, for password hashing. You can add stuff such as account lockout to prevent denial of service attacks and just brute force attacks of username and passwords. So you can say if a user tries to enter more than 5 times, I will just lock the user out, and they will have to reset their password. So reset password is another feature you have in the ASP.NET Identity System. I can actually have a sign-out from everywhere. I can change my timestamp in a database, making all the cookies that users currently have become expired. So if I change my password, for example, I can have all my devices show me the login window again, just so I'll be able to enter my new password. Okay, and one of the cool things is that all the list of users and roles, first of all, is queryable. So I can actually find all the users that are using Facebook, stuff like that. And I can actually change how I persist the data. So I don't even have to use a database for that. Okay, I can actually use NoSQL storage, Azure tables, whichever I want to write stuff to, XML files. Don't do that. Okay. If you want to know more about how to migrate your existing membership or simple membership to Identity 2, I will have a URL at the resource page. If you want to learn more on what's new, because this is a partial list, this is the highlights, there's also a link at the bottom. It will also show up in the resource slide, so you don't need to screenshot the slide. So let's go ahead and see some code, because that's why you came here for, right? See some code. Okay. So I have here a computer that has Visual Studio, and I have here an application. And remember, this is a security session, so we're doing stuff with security. This is an application that manages secret agents, and I'm an Israeli, so I know what I'm talking about. Okay, trust me. And what we have here, first of all, is a list of secret agents. For some reason, I didn't secure this list. Okay, so if you want to grab the list of secret agents without getting the information, just send a web API request. Let me just open up Fiddler here so we'll be able to actually see those web requests later on. But if I try to access one of them, I will actually get an error message saying that this user is unauthorized, because that web API request actually checks for authorization, okay, and authentication. So if we take a look at the code, you will see that I actually have here a web API service. And, by the way, just let me know, can you see from the back, or should I increase the font? Can you see? Great. Okay. So as you can see, I have an API controller here, and I have the authorized header. And not only do I have an authorized header, it's also saying that I want that agent to belong to a role called agents. Okay? So the currently logged in user should also have a role of agents in order to get information. So why was I able to actually get that list of agents? Well, if I'll scroll down to getting the list of agents, I will see I have here an allow anonymous attribute, meaning that I'm overriding those settings that I had on my controller, and I can actually allow any user to access the system. So to get the information about the user, first of all, I'll log in. Okay, I already created the user in the system. I'll show you in a second how I did that. And I log in using an admin user, which is also in the agents role. And now I'm actually able to pull information about agents. Okay? Or if you prefer someone local and not from the UK. Okay, so I was able to get information through Web API. I have here a Web API action that returns the name and the alias. I have a Web API that returns the image, list of observations, list of the nemesis. I can also add new user. But basically what I did is I just logged in into the system, and currently I have a cookie, and the Web API service actually uses that cookie to verify I'm authenticated. So I'm actually using the same cookie of MVC also for Web API. So once I log into the system, I have access to both MVC and Web API. Now, let's imagine that I'm not using an MVC application. I'm calling in from .NET. Okay, so I can't actually show users that register window, that login window. So I'm currently logged up to the system. Let me just try to do that. Okay, I'm unauthorized. Now I want to log into the application, but I'm in the .NET application. So I want to call my services, but I need to, first of all, send my credentials to the service, get an auth token from it, and then submit that auth token for every request that I send to the service. So what I have here is a small button saying sign in with auth. Okay? And I'll show you in a second what that button does. And it just said logged in as admin. I'm currently logged in. I have an OAuth bearer header that I can actually use when I send requests to the server. And let me try to pull something now. As you can see, I'm actually able to pull all the information aside for the image. Any idea why I can't pull the image? I'll tell you why. Because I'm using an image tag, and I can't instruct the image tag to send the authorization header, the HTTP header, to the server. Okay? But if I'm using a .NET application, I can actually send the request as I like to send it and include that header and get the image and then show it in an image element. Okay? So that's basically just browser stuff that I can do. So for example, how did I send that OAuth? So let me just show you some JavaScript code. Anyone here likes JavaScript? Okay. So you're in the right session. Let me just go here. I'm telling you, I've been writing code for 17 years. I still don't like JavaScript. Bunch of code. By the way, all this code is online. You will be able to grab it after the session and just go through everything and copy-paste into your own projects. Okay, that's basically what I will do if I would be in your place. Let me just go scroll down. Okay, so I'm doing a sign-in, and that sign-in basically does the following. It creates a JSON object saying my user is admin, my password is, well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then just send it to using an AJAX call to a URL/token. And that's supposed to give me back my access token. So I'm just pulling that access token from the return data. We'll see exactly where I configure this in a second. And I'm taking that access token, and I'm putting it in my local storage. Familiar with local storage in HTML5? Yeah, just some place to put stuff in the browser so I will be able to access them later on through the application. And then when I need to get the information, I can actually grab those, grab those stuff from the local storage and add them as headers to my request. So I'm just getting an access token from a web API service of some sort, storing it in memory, and adding that to every one of the requests that I'm sending to the server. I can basically do the same calls in C# if I'm using a .NET client application, WPF, Windows Store, doesn't matter which application. Just send the request using JSON saying this is the user, this is the password. Of course, use HTTPS for that, right? Don't send it in clear text, not using HTTPS. Get the token, store that token, and include that token every time you send a request to the server. Now, where did I actually get this option to use the /token? I got it from, well, Owen, of course. So when you create a new web application, let me just show you that, because I don't know how many of you tried to create a new web application in the last couple of months. When you create a new web application and you select, of course, .NET 4.5, you actually get the different types of applications, MVC, Web API, single-page application. You can also set the authentication mode that you want for that application. So if I pick individual user account, I will actually get all the OWIN configuration, all the all the database configuration, everything I need in order to start working with MVC and those stuff of ASP.NET Identity. If I choose to use Web API, okay, I can also get stuff, well, that's if I use the single-page application. I will also get the same user management, but through an API service instead of through an MVC application. Okay, so just create one of these, copy all that code, and bring it to your application. That's basically what I did. Now, let's get back to this application, and let's view this authentication stuff. So what I'm doing here, I'm actually using two types of authentication. The first one uses, this one, an auth bearer token. That auth bearer token was responsible for the Web API stuff. Okay, so what the user actually had to do, they had to send the username and password to the /token URL. Then I authenticated the information using the special application auth provider. As you can see in the application auth provider, let me just scroll down. It just tries to find the username according to the username and password. If it finds it, it creates a security token. Doesn't find it, you'll get an error, okay, and you will just be alerted that the user is unauthenticated. Now, that's nice for Web API, but what about that MVC? I did sign in, right? And I got a cookie back. So all of that sign-in is managed by MVC. So when you create a new project, as I showed you before, you actually get a whole bunch of controllers. You get an account controller that has all the code to manage users. So I have an option to, say, register a new user. Okay, so it basically just retrieves the information that you wrote in the register window, username, password, email, first name, last name, do you want email confirmation for user accounts or not, and it will just create that user asynchronously, just so to make it to perform better. If you want to log in, that controller also manages the login. Sorry. And you can see here that I'm actually also managing the login. I'm trying to find that user, and if that user is authenticated, I'll go ahead and check if it needs a two-factor authentication or not. Okay? So instead of just showing the code, let me just run it again, and let's go through the process of creating a new user, for example. So let me just register a new user. Now, I'm already using email confirmation in my application. So let me punch in a user, email, password. Now, I'm using a simple password. Of course, you can change the password validator to use characters and uppercase letters and lowercase letters. It's configurable. Let me also enable two-factor authentication. Let me also say that I'm an agent, so I'll be able to use those web APIs. Now, I'm registering for the application, but it tells me that I have to confirm an email. I have to confirm my account using email. So let me just switch to Outlook because I already sent that email. Let me click here. That email was just sent. It didn't wait for me in the mailbox just for the demo. Okay? It was sent immediately. And email is confirmed. If you actually look at the table that manages the users, you'll see that before I confirm my email, the email confirmation column has false in it. After I confirm it, just changes to true. So you can even rely on that setting to decide whether you want users to be able to log into the system or to perform actions in the system. You can actually check if they already confirmed their email or not. So it's quite simple to do that. It's strange that I'm saying simple in a security session, right? Security is never simple. But here it is simple. So let me now log in using my user. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And now I'm asked to enter a verification code. That verification code is because I checked that enable two-factor authentication. So let me go back to my email, and let me wait for the authentication code to arrive. Okay, here it is. Copy, paste. Remove the space because I didn't write the code to trim spaces. And now I'm logged in. Simple as that. Okay? ASP.NET Identity gives me the power to use email confirmation using any type of email service that you want. I'm using SendGrid, but you can use anything you want. Just plug in your SMTP service to that. You can have two-factor authentication using any technique that you want. I used emails, but you can use text messaging. You can use, I don't know, any stuff that you can think of, email, phone calls, any stuff that you can use in your organization to do two-factor authentication. Okay? And if you want to know exactly how to do that, well, as I said, I have code for everything. So if you just download the code, go to the task list, and look for the comments, there's a to-do here. It's already implemented. You don't have to do anything. Okay? Just follow the steps here for the two-factor authentication. You'll see exactly how I did that two-factor authentication and how I did those stuff for email confirmation. Everything is already written. Everything is documented. You can just pull that stuff and use it in your own application. Okay, just remove the to-do stuff so people won't think you're still working on it. Okay, so we can do a whole bunch of stuff in ASP.NET Identity. And I just want to move on because we have a lot more things to talk about. So as I mentioned before, in ASP.NET Identity, we don't have to manage the users ourselves. We don't have to ask them for passwords and reset their passwords and lock their system out. We can actually use external identity providers. If you want to allow users to log into your application using Facebook, if you want to allow people to log into your application using their Google accounts or Microsoft accounts, you can actually do that. Okay? You can do anything that you want using external users. You can even plug it, if you want, into your own ADFS system. So how do we do that? Basically, it's just writing the proper controller. Okay? You try to log in using a user account from another system. We'll just redirect you to that user account. You will enter your username and password. The ASP.NET system doesn't know anything about that username and password. All we get back from that identity provider is just a list of personal information using claims, of course, because that's how we communicate with other systems. And we'll get back an access token identifying your user in that other system. So instead of just describing how it works, let me just show you how it works. Okay? So let's switch back to our demo. And first of all, let's just try that out. Okay, so it's the same application. I only changed the URL on the top, so I'll be able to access it through an internet address, because some identity providers don't allow to use localhost for identification of users. So I'm getting the same list of users here, and if I'll try to click one of them, I won't be able to do anything. Okay, it's just not working. As you can see, for example, in Fiddler, I'm getting a 401 in response. So I'll try to log in. So now when I'm logging in, if you remember, we had the left side of the screen before. I'm able to use a username and a password, but now I'm also able to use other services, Microsoft account, Google, Facebook. So I can actually go to, say, Facebook, enter my username, password. Okay, so I was redirected to Facebook. Now I'm redirected back to my application, but I'm not done yet, because in my application, it's not enough for me to know your identity in Facebook. I also want to know your username, so it will allow you to see personal messages, maybe your first name and last name. As you can see, actually, this is not hard-coded. Okay, you can come to me, give me your identity, and I'll show you that it's actually grabbing that information from Facebook. So when Facebook actually sends the information back to my ASP.NET, it contains all sorts of information about the user. Of course, when you create the application, you can decide what information you want Facebook or Google to send back to you. Doesn't necessarily mean that you will get that information, okay? But you can ask for it. So I've asked for personal information. So I'm getting the first name, the last name, and the full name of the authenticated user. So I just placed it in the right text box and asked the user to just fill in the information so I can store it in my database. Because afterwards, when I send them an email, I want to say, hi, Ido, this is a suggestion I have for you how to use the system more efficiently. So let me just register my user. And now, as you can see, I know who the user is. I can go ahead and access the system. Okay, see all my agents. And let me just show you some bits of the code of how I did that. So first of all, as I mentioned before, all the code is online. Of course, I removed all my secret passwords on how to authenticate to Facebook and Microsoft and all that sort of stuff. And however I think about it, and this session is recorded, so everyone will be able to see my secret passwords. Okay, so I'll delete them after the session. Okay. So let's go ahead and check the authentication stuff here. So first of all, for Web API, I still have the same auth options. If I want to authenticate using active authentication, just send the user password, and you will get a token back. Now, if I want to use other means of authentication, I have the configuration. Sorry, it's the wrong one. Wrong one here. Okay, so I have the option to use other types, such as Microsoft accounts, okay, Google accounts, and I also have the option to use Facebook accounts. So you can just plug in every type of identity provider that has an OWIN implementation. So Microsoft already gave you authentication using Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Twitter, and I think that's it. If you want other stuff like LinkedIn or stuff like that, you can just search online for OWIN LinkedIn authentication. I already included a URL for a bunch of other authentication mechanisms that you can use, such as GitHub or LinkedIn, Yahoo, Reddit, that sort of stuff. You can, of course, search online. A lot of people are adding OWIN components to the community, and there are all sorts of stuff that you can use. Okay, so what should I basically supply when I'm creating, for example, let's say a Microsoft account? Okay, so for Microsoft account, I actually went to the Microsoft website, to my live ID. I created a new application there, and I just added a bunch of URLs saying where my application is, because the Microsoft account needs to redirect the message back to me. And it gave me a bunch of usernames and secret passwords that I need to put in my code. Okay, so you can grab that, but I'm deleting it this afternoon, so I don't know if there will be a point to take that. I also included the full description here of how to actually do that, including a tip on how to make it work if you're using localhost. Okay, so this is basically what I need to do. What I get back is a token. Now, for that, I didn't actually need to write any code on how to decipher that token and how to store that token in the database, because luckily, the ASP.NET identity system already generated all that code for me. So if you remember the code that we had before in the generated MVC controller, so let me just go back to the MVC controller. And you'll actually see that I have a bunch of methods called external login callback, external login confirmation. These are the methods that handle all that external login. Okay? So it redirects me to the identity provider. It handles the response of the redirection, pulls the claims out of it. I can also say stuff like add custom claims. So for example, Facebook doesn't know I'm an agent, right? So my web API shouldn't have worked. But luckily for me, I can just go to my to my callback, and let me just find where I placed that. I think I placed it here. Just find, where did I put that code? Just look at that for a second. Match case, yeah. Okay. Give me a second, I'll find it. Here we go. Okay. Not this one, this one. Okay. So once the external login is confirmed, I'm just going to the user manager and manually adding a role called agent to my user. So by the way, I haven't shown it before, but it's very easy to create new users when you reset the system, when you initialize it for the first time. For example, in the previous demo I showed you, I had an admin user which I created. I actually created it automatically using the Entity Framework database initialization. Are you familiar with the database initialization of Entity Framework? Familiar? That seed method we have in Entity Framework? No? Let me just show it to you so you'll know what to do when you need to initialize a database, at least with an admin user so you can walk. Right? So the entire entity, the entire identity management of ASP.NET is based on Entity Framework today. Okay? It's not based on some SQL statements and store procedures like it used to be. It's entirely Entity Framework, and I have for that an initialization code that actually creates the first user in the database, and that user is an admin user. Okay, I'm turning off the two-factor authentication for that user. I'm setting the username, the password. I'm also creating a role for that user, and I'm just placing it in the database using standard Entity Framework stuff. Okay, simple as that. And once I did that, I have the first user in the system. Now, by the way, the fact that I'm using Entity Framework, as I mentioned, does not necessarily mean that I can only use SQL Server databases. A lot of people today are using NoSQL databases. Anyone using NoSQL databases today? NoSQL databases, anyone? So apparently no one is using NoSQL databases today. Okay. But just in case you're going to use NoSQL databases, for example, Azure Tables. So maybe you didn't know, but Azure Tables is a sort of NoSQL storage. I also created a demo that you can use, or not, depends on you, to store all the user information in an Azure table. So let me just start that up. This solution actually doesn't use a database to manage users. It uses NoSQL storage, which is basically just a table with a lot of entities in it. If you don't know what NoSQL databases are, just Google it or Bing it with Google, whichever you like. Okay, so let me just log off and log in again here. Log in, admin. Okay, I've logged in using my admin account, but actually that admin information didn't come from a database. It actually came from an Azure table. I can go to my Visual Studio, open my Windows Azure stuff here. I have my storage stuff. I'm using currently a development storage. So as you can see, I actually have tables here, Azure tables, for my identities, for my roles, and my relation between my identity and roles. And if I look at the identities, I'll actually see I have an admin user here. Of course, the password is hashed. Okay, I can decide exactly how I want to hash that password. And I also have my roles. So of course, an admin has the role of an agent. Okay, and I basically just created some code. Didn't took me that long. It took me about an hour to create custom code that uses Azure table storage and just implement every piece of the user management, such as add a user, delete a user, update a user, add a user to a role. I just implemented every one of those methods using Azure tables. If you want to try that out, as I mentioned before, the code is here, including all the steps of how to hook it up into your into your Owen middleware. So let me just show that Owen middleware part, because a lot of people are interested in Owen these days. This one. Okay. So as you can see, I'm using an application user management custom type. And here in this method, I'm just creating a new Azure table user store instead of the standard user store that I get from the ASP.NET Identity System, which uses DB Context and Entity Framework. So I'm creating a custom Azure table user store, which I created. And this handles a special application user type that I created and a special Azure table row type that I created to manage the roles. So if you look at that code, I basically just have code here that uses the cloud storage account, cloud table client, and just manages everything using table storage, if you're familiar with Azure. If not, I will simply close those pages so you won't have to bother yourself with Azure stuff ever again. Okay? So back to our presentation. Yeah. Now, of course, ASP.NET Identity is just one of the options that we have with ASP.NET. So I can secure, as you saw, MVC. I can secure Web API. I can even secure SignalR. Maybe I'll show it to you in a second. Anyone using SignalR today? SignalR? SignalR? Okay. I have a cool demo about SignalR. I will show it to you in a minute. So identity system is nice if you're building, for example, if you're working in an enterprise and you're building a system that is aimed at external users. But for internal users, which are a part of the enterprise, you'll probably not use the ASP.NET Identity System because you already have a repository that has all your users, right? And that repository is called Active Directory. Yeah. So how do we handle ASP.NET today with the new ASP.NET stuff in .NET 4.5 for on-premises and for the cloud? Active Directory, ADFS, Azure Active Directory. Just with a show of hands again, how many people are using Active Directory? Okay. How many people actually, keep your hands up. How many people here actually know how to use, for example, LDAP? So more people raise their hands. Okay, that's interesting. Usually, people lower their hands because they don't know how to use LDAP queries. Okay. How many people are using ADFS, that Active Directory Federation Services? Okay, so that means that you're the only people that work from home, right? Lucky you. How many people are using Azure Active Directory? Okay, so we're the only one working in the cloud and on airplanes, probably. So what has changed over the years in how you work with Active Directory? So first of all, if you are using Active Directory, you're probably using that IIS Windows authentication stuff, right? Just go to IIS configuration, open authentication, and choose to use Windows authentication. Basically, IIS handles everything for you. You don't even have to know or to add any code into your ASP.NET application. You simply get that principal with your user, and if you want to get information, it automatically pulls your roles from Active Directory. You want to get any other custom information from the custom schema you have, and just use LDAP to send queries to the Active Directory. That's nice. But we're not all using Active Directory because in the next couple of years, you will see a lot of use of ADFS because we'll switch to using mobile devices. We'll switch to using tablets, even in the enterprise. And mobile devices and tablets will usually not use them in our office because in our office we have a computer or laptop. We'll use them when we're on the road, when we're heading back home. Of course, not while driving. Okay, important. Don't use your tablets to check emails while driving. But we'll use them when we're not at work. And when we're not at work, we can't use Active Directory to authenticate ourselves because no sane IT pro will open the port of their Active Directory authentication to the internet, right? None of you are IT pros, right? Okay. None of you are sane, right? Okay. So we will probably use ADFS because ADFS allows us to use different ports, HTTP ports to send in our authentication, to send in usernames and passwords. That's basically what ADFS is. Now, if you ever used ADFS in .NET, you probably remember that ADFS in previous years actually required you to install a special framework inside your code. It's called the Windows Identity Foundation, or WIF for short. That's how we call it back home in Israel. And to use WIF, you actually had to install that, download that, and install it. And if you migrated your application to the cloud, you actually needed to remember to do that in the cloud because it's not automatically installed on the server. And that all changed in .NET 4.5. Because in .NET 4.5, some probably brilliant person in Microsoft realized that everyone is using WIF to authenticate with the ADFS, and they just put the Windows Identity Foundation as part of the framework. So if you've used Windows Identity Foundation in your .NET code up until version 4.5, go to your code. There is a bunch of keys called Control-Shift-F, right? You know that? Yeah? Find in files. And just replace everywhere you see Microsoft.identity model to system.identity model, because now it's part of the framework. So best of luck replacing all the occurrences of that, because they also change a bunch of the assemblies and the assembly names. So you're in for a journey, but it will take about a day or two to switch everything if you're switching to .NET 4.5. But now we actually have more options to use the Windows Identity Foundation, because today with ASP.NET, we actually have all that code inside Owen components. So it doesn't matter if you used ADFS with, say, SAML, Security Application Markup Language, or you used it with WS Federation, or used it with OAuth. All of these features to identify a user are supported by Owen components. So you don't actually need to configure WIF using those HTTP modules and then bang your head against the wall when you need to handle all of these events of WIF just to recognize if you are coming from a web API service or from an MVC application, and to decide whether you want to return a redirect or a 401. Okay? If you don't believe me, just check Vittorio's session from yesterday about identity on Channel 9 and see what he thinks about doing all of that stuff. And he asked how many people are using events in Windows Identity Foundation, and I'm the only person who rose their hand. So if you want to create, for example, an application that uses ADFS today with Visual Studio 2013, it's easier than ever. If we go back to creating a new web application, just create a new web application, say, for example, that you're using MVC, set the authentication to organizational account, and although the default here is cloud, just open this, select on-premises. Oh, sorry. So again, create a new web application, select the MVC option, click the change authentication, switch from individual user account, which you talked up until so far, to organizational accounts, and just select on-premises. The default one is cloud. On-premises, and just enter the address of your ADFS server. Okay, the address of the ADFS, the application ID, and Visual Studio will just configure everything else you need to know. Okay, so you don't need to do anything. It will also add the entire OWIN settings that you need to use. If you're using Web API, it will use OWIN. If you're using MVC, it will still use the Windows Identity Foundation. And it's just simple as that. Okay, I will show it to you in a few seconds once I'm just done with the next slide. So in addition to ADFS, if you are going to switch to the cloud, which I highly recommend because it's fun working with Azure, couple of words about Azure Active Directory. So I think about 2 people, 3 including me, said they were using Azure Active Directory, right? Azure Active Directory is basically Active Directory as a service. That's why it's so fun for us as developers to use it, because we don't need to actually create a virtual machine and install Active Directory on top of it. How many people did that ever? Right? Okay. We need to do that. We trust that it works. We don't actually know what it does, that DC promo command, but it works somehow. I don't know. Creates an Active Directory server for you. Well, at least I can remote desktop to it and add users and groups afterwards. That's the most interesting stuff. I don't know anything about forests or AD replication, or I don't care about it. I just want somewhere to store my users in the cloud. So you don't need to do that. You have Active Directory, which is basically a service. You create a new Active Directory, your manager pays for that Active Directory, and you just go ahead and add users and groups to that one. Okay? And it's easy, very easy to secure application using that Active Directory. If I just go back just a second to that same place, change authentication, organization, this option, cloud, just name your Active Directory here, press OK, and it will automatically create all the application settings it needs, and it will just place that secret password inside your web config, and you're done. You can use Active Directory. Okay, it's that simple. Now, Active Directory as a service in Azure provides you with user management and group management, but it also provides you with a very large schema that you can use. You can add claims to all of your users. To do that, you can use simple HTTP services, RESTful services, using a tool called the Graph API, just calling RESTful services from code. Okay, you even have a wrapper for that if you're using .NET. Azure Active Directory can use the same authentication techniques of ADFS. So if you're switching from ADFS to Azure, you just need to replace one line of code, one address, and you can even leave the name of your application. Okay, it's simple as that. I'll show you in a demo in a minute. But one important thing about Azure Active Directory, since Azure Active Directory is updated more frequently than ADFS, Azure Active Directory also supports the new standards that are coming out all the time. So for example, the OpenID Connect standard that was released a couple of months ago, Azure already supports that. ADFS still doesn't support that, I guess maybe in the next version. So if you're interested, by the way, in knowing what OpenID Connect is, go to channel 9, watch Vittorio's session from yesterday. There's a whole bunch of explanations about OAuth and OpenID Connect. It will really make you understand what everything does. So let's go ahead and take a look on how to work with all of those identity providers, and it should make everything clearer. Okay, so let's switch back to our application. So again, I'm using the same application, an MVC application, and a web API service that provides me access to all of my agents. And now I'm using a front end that actually pulls the information from Azure Active Directory. So the first thing that I'll do is this time, instead of navigating my user to the first page showing the list of agents, I actually require the user to be authenticated in advance. By the way, I can do that quite easily for the previous demos. If you go to the code and you go to your, let's say for this one, and you go to your home controller, you can just add the authorized attribute on top of MVC controllers and MVC actions, and that will actually prevent the user from ever seeing the first page of the application. They will automatically be redirected to the login page. I just chose not to do that because it was more funny to say, here's a list of agents, you can grab the list of agents, blah, blah, blah. So I'm required to log in into Azure Active Directory. So let me log in. You can also customize your domain. So I customize my domain. Here I am. Logging in. I'm logged in currently into Azure Active Directory. Azure Active Directory sends back an access token to my application. My application now knows who I am, and I can actually now, let me just zoom out a bit. Okay. The application now knows who I am and allows me to enter the system. Now, for that to work, of course, I had to belong to that agents group, right? But basically, Azure Active Directory manages both users and groups. So when I created my user, I also created a group in Azure Active Directory called agents, attached myself to it, and I just needed to add some code, some bunch of code to use that Graph API to pull that information. So I know you're not interested in Azure, but I'm interested in Azure, so I'll show you that code. You can close your eyes. So let me just, wait, mouse, close, open. I'm still going to adjust it to my new Mac. Here we go. Okay, so after I connect to Azure and I'm generating my cookie, I'm also generating a bunch of claims. And if I don't have any role claims, I'm simply using Graph API to connect to my directory service. This, by the way, uses OData. Are you familiar with OData? Yeah? The Graph API basically uses RESTful services with the OData standard. So I'm connecting to that OData, searching for my user, loading that property that says member of. I want to know which groups I belong to. Pull the groups, select all of the groups, and create a matching claim for each of those groups. And that way I can actually populate my set of claims with information from Active Directory. So right now I'll populate it with a bunch of roles. But if I want to know in the application, for example, which department I belong to, I can pull that information. If I want to know what my pen size are or what I ate for breakfast, as long as it says so in the Active Directory, I can pull that information too. Okay? Just add the claims. You don't have to save it somewhere. As long as you add it to the identity, it will automatically be saved in the cookie. So I just need to do that, and now my application knows I'm agent name Ido, and I belong to the agents group, and it will allow me to call my web API services. Now, if I wanted not to use Azure Active Directory, but instead use, for example, ADFS, I don't have to do a lot of changes. So let me just go ahead and change this code to work with ADFS. So instead of calling into my Azure Active Directory metadata, I will call into my ADFS server, which is also in the cloud by accident, okay, because I don't have a machine near me. Just change the addresses and the name of the application. Okay, I'll leave this code for now, but if you want to also be able to authenticate against a web API using active protocols, just use Windows Azure Active Directory to use Active Directory Federation services. It's a different method. Okay, by the way, you get all of these options, I didn't mention that, from a NuGet package called microsoft.oin.security.active directory. Look that up, and you will be able to use all of those stuff. Let me just compile this, close the browser, run this again. And now it will redirect me, but not to Azure Active Directory, but to my ADFS server. And as you can see, this is a different login. I will need to enter my domain and my user and my password. And just as before, I'm sending my credentials to an ADFS server, which sends them to an internal Active Directory server, returns a token, and I'm in my application. I can pull stuff from my database, which is internal to the enterprise, and basically I just use the username and password of my organization from outside of the organization. So that's ADFS. If you are going to use mobile devices and that sort of stuff to access your organizational applications, ASP.NET applications, you should check out ADFS. Okay, so I'm logged in. I can check my list of agents, send them to kill someone. Okay, and by the way, I promised to show you Signal stuff, right? Do you want to see Signal stuff? We have time. Yeah, Signal stuff. Okay, so let me go back to my original application, my ASP.NET identity, just so I can show you some cool stuff. So this application uses Signal when I'm adding new agents. So I have an option to add a new agent. When I add a new agent, I'm sending a Signal broadcast from the server telling all the clients, this is a new agent, please add that agent to the list. Okay, so let me just show with one client, and then with two clients, and then with 3 clients, and then with 4 clients, and then with 5 clients. No, we'll stop at 3. So do we know any secret agent? Yeah, my name is Ido Flato, and my nickname is, well, let's face it. Okay? Oh, yeah, I'm not authenticated. Forgot that small part. Let me log in. Oh, wrong password. Okay, let me do that again. As I said, my name is Ido. And okay, and I was added to the system. That name that appeared at the bottom appeared because I got a Signal notification to my web browser. Now let me just try to do that again with another browser. Let's copy this address. And this browser currently is not logged into the system, right? I didn't specify my user. Let me add another user here. Let me just do some small thing like this. Create. It was added here. It wasn't added here. Now let's log in here too. You can use a different user, which I created before. Oh, okay, verification code. Let me wait for a second. Verification code. You should usually just allow the user to disable the two-factor authentication once they log in for the first time to the application, right? If it's their machine, there's no need to ask them that two-factor authentication every time. Copy, paste, delete backspace. Okay, I'm logged in. Let me go back to my first one. Do you want me to add a new user from Chrome or from IE? Which one? It doesn't really matter, yeah. WebSockets work in both of them, surprisingly. Okay, create, will it work? Ideas? Okay, I'm logged into the system. That user belongs to the agent's role, so they will be able to get that Signal notification. If they, by the way, if they didn't belong to the agent's role, they will probably not get that notification, even if they are authenticated and they are logged into the system. So the same authorized header that I can use in Web API, the same authorized header that I use in MVC, I can actually use that also in Signal. So let me just show you. Where is my hub? Services, hubs. Okay, this is a Signal hub, and I have the authorized header here, and that's basically that. Okay, I didn't add the roles here, but you can add that too. So the same mechanism of authorizing users, it really depends on whether you're using cookies or OAuth or Azure Active Directory, but it can work with any of them, and you don't actually need to change anything in your Web API and your MVC code. You just work with anything that just populates that principle and identity of your users. So to recap the stuff that we talked about, what options do we have? And now I hope that you'll choose the option that is right for you. If you're using identity management of your own, if you want to manage users in the database because you're creating internet applications or enterprise applications that are intended to be used by external users, then you should probably use the ASP.NET identity system. Don't invent stuff on your own, okay? Please raise your hand if you invented your own security mechanism. Aren't you ashamed to raise your hands? Come to talk to me later, okay? If you are part of the enterprise and you're inside the enterprise, you can use Active Directory just as you've used it before. If you are using ADFS, there are a new bunch of stuff that you can use. First of all, Windows Identity Foundation, which is part of the framework now, and it's a lot easier to use. But if you want to use the own parts, so you can use OAuth, you can use WS Federation, you can use the Azure Active Directory, but instead of Azure, just use Azure Directory Federation, so Active Directory Federation services. And if you are using Azure Active Directory, you can also use the same techniques as ADFS, and you can also use OpenID Connect. And I'll probably change this slide in a couple of months once ADFS also has OpenID Connect. Okay? So a bunch of resources for you to use. You can take a picture of that, but I will also show it again in a second. Blogs, really great blogs from the web development team that tells you exactly how to use all the stuff in ASP.NET for securing your applications. There are the addresses here for the ASP.NET identity code and for the Katana project. A bunch of documents that you can use in order to understand how Azure works. And of course, if you want to ask me any other questions, such as how do I hack into other people's systems, just email me or tweet me. And of course, don't forget, please, to evaluate this session. Okay? If you want to check out other sessions that relate to ASP.NET or to security, there are a bunch of sessions that you can, well, you won't be able to go to because the conference is almost done. But you will be able to check them on Channel 9. If you want to meet me later, I will be at the Tech Expo. I'm going to have a book signing for a new book I helped to co-author in the APRES booth. Sorry. There's also, of course, the booth for the developer tools that you can go to, a bunch of other resources. I'll shortly go back to my original resource slide. Visual Studio resources, MSDN resources, Channel 9, of course, if you want to watch all the videos that we had here in the conference. So please, again, don't forget to fill in your evaluation. It's very important if you want to see me here next year. Okay? And let me just go back. You know what? Let me just go back to this final slide so you can clap for me. So thank you very much for coming to this session. I hope you enjoyed it and that you will enjoy the rest of the conference today. Thank you.